to Mental Health Momentum, a Silicon Slopes podcast. I'm Dr. David Morgan. I'm a licensed psychologist and the Director of Mental Health Awareness here at Silicon Slopes. And on this podcast, we talk about mental health issues in the workplace and look for solutions to fix those. Today, my guest is Earl Foote. Earl is the dynamic founder and CEO of Nexus IT, which is an award-winning MSP and MSSP celebrating over a quarter century of innovation in managed IT services. With 26 years of bootstrapping experience, Earl's leadership has guided Nexus IT to prestigious accolades, including multiple placements in Inc. 5000, CRN Pioneer 250, and many local awards. He's a passionate adventurer, musician, and yogi. He balances his professional achievements with a love for the outdoors, music, yoga, meditation, and the pursuit of mindfulness and consciousness while fostering a culture of positivity and abundance at Nexus IT. Whether on the slopes, on stage, on the mat, or in the boardroom, Earl is committed to making a meaningful impact with his team and the world around him. Earl, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, David. This is going to be a lot of fun. I really appreciate the invitation.
I am so glad to have you here. So tell us a little bit more about yourself. The yoga.
Yeah.
So how did you get into that? What?
Yeah, it was about 12 years ago. I found myself being a part-time, what do I want to say? A part-time single dad, right?
Okay.
When my ex-wife and I split up and we shared custody, I would have weeks off without my boys. For 15 or 16 years of, my life at that point, really, my life was their life. Of course,
Sure.
Outside of the office, it was just, competitive soccer and school stuff
Right.
and, whatever was going on with the kids. Right. And of course I didn't stop going to their competitive soccer games on the weeks that I didn't have them. Right. But I did find myself with a few, weeknights and weekends open here
Right.
and there that I wasn't, something that I had before. So, I decided to, pursue some interests. I kind of got back into music at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I had played in a band in college, and I grew up playing a lot of music. And as I started a business and a family, I stepped away from music. But
Sure.
the other
You play
thing,
the bass, is that right?
yeah, I'm a
Okay.
bassist. Yeah. I play guitar too.
Okay.
I don't shred, on the guitar, but I'm decent on the bass. One of the other things that I had some, mild interest to and some exposure, to was meditation and some yoga. I just decided to start going to, some of the local courses. Actually, at the time, a client of ours in Park City had a really cool restored old wood shop garage called The Shop, where he had a nice yoga studio. And so I started going there and learning the craft of yoga and meditation, and got more deeply exposed to mindfulness and awareness. And I've spent a good part of the last 12 years, I would say, as a deep student and practitioner of all of those ideas. Right. Certainly do not have any one of them mastered. And I've had my my times where I've gone back and forth, where I've been more dedicated towards those practices, and times where I've leaned into just being busy and not not being as disciplined with the practices, right? Yeah, and I really, David, I really enjoy the physical movement of yoga. I find it a really great way to start or to end my day.
Yeah.
It definitely provides me with a lot of physical relief in my body and just, feeling of, kind of wholeness and that kind of stuff. And then, meditation I've found to be, probably my most effective tool to manage life and stress and anxiety and, running businesses, which is, can be a lot of chaos.
Absolutely.
And a lot of challenge. Right. So those are the practices that I found really, really ground me as an individual. And we can talk, fundamentally and philosophically a little bit more around mindfulness and awareness and all those things, that as they relate to mental health.
Yeah.
But I found them to be some of my greatest coping mechanisms and some of my greatest tools, in life.
I love the idea of grounding, and that's something, and I've done maybe 10 yoga workouts in my life, but they talk about that, right? I mean, like be kind of this connection with the earth and that, and as I've thought about that as a mental health professional, almost everyone that I've talked to throughout my career, and over 10,000 clients over my career, as I've talked with them, in every case, there is this sense of being out of control to a certain extent, right? That they're being manipulated. They're kind of being whipped around by the tail, by life, by their circumstance, whatever it is. And then that causes some sort of mental health condition, either
trauma or something.
Exactly, trauma or anxiety or depression or something like that, because of the experience they're having, because they don't feel, they're just being kind of yanked around. And so the idea of grounding, which is like saying, I'm going to get connected to something.
Yeah.
I'm going to literally plug into something that I have control over. Anyway, I think there's so much that we could learn from yoga, these Eastern philosophies, like we were talking about earlier before the podcast. Quite frankly, I don't think I'd have much work if I was a psychologist in China. I don't know. I don't know that I would have as many clients.
Yeah, I think there's a lot we can learn in the Western world, from those Eastern philosophical ideologies, and you're right. I mean, finding a way to get centered in life, whatever your coping mechanism is, right? But finding a way to get centered, and in yoga, grounding literally is, can be the practice of earthing, of connecting to the earth. I mean, we know we have electricity in our bodies, right? And the earth has electricity; it's a conductor. And there's pseudoscience around the health of connecting to the earth, right? And discharging and recharging, and all that kind of stuff. Of course, none of it's accepted by mainstream science, but it's definitely something that's very prevalent in those Eastern cultures and things we can learn. Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that some of our listeners are going to be people who are just starting their companies and they're bootstrapping like you have in the past, and they are running themselves ragged, 24/7 because you have to hustle, right? You have to do this to get going. That's unsustainable over time, right? I mean, you are going to burn out if you do that enough. I think one of the challenges is that a lot of people that have the gumption to do that are highly capable, and so they can go a long time without burning out, but everybody's going to hit the wall at some point if they don't take care of themselves. So I'm curious, just with your perspective, did you always, like you said, it's been a couple of decades that you've been working with Nexus IT. Did you
26 years,
did you always have that kind of mindset of time for yourself, work-life balance, those sorts of things, or did that develop over time? Did you have to hit the wall yourself?
Honestly, that really wasn't a conversation 26 years ago when I started my business, right?
For sure. Yeah.
That's a little newer in today's, corporate America, right? Stepping back there, David, I started my business at the age of 23. I was working full-time during the day, taking 18 to 21 credit hours at night, married, had a baby, and started a business all within a span of a couple of years, right? I was psychotic, probably, it was chaotic. There's no doubt. And I have deep appreciation for the founder's condition, particularly more budding, entrepreneurs who maybe haven't done it before. It's very, very easy to get yourself overworked, to pick up anxiety. I'm sure that I gave myself self-induced anxiety, earlier on in my career. You and I were talking before the podcast about, this concept of getting comfortable with discomfort, right? In the entrepreneurial world, we like to say there's no growth in the comfort zone and there's no comfort in the growth zone, right? There are few things in life that you can do that will stretch you further and faster than to try to start a company, right? The risks, the liabilities,
all this existential threat too of what if I fail, and all that time and money down the drain.
Yeah. Well, in our relationship in the Western world with that concept of failure, right? Too, like the psychological kind of, weight of that is really significant. And, there's real world risk behind that when you have a family, you're trying to make ends meet, you're trying to pay payroll, you're trying to pay your vendors. It's legit. And I really sympathize for, founders out there because I've been there and I know, and it's not that, and I'm very, very aware of all that today. And I have a lot of, my practices that I use to try to help keep me focused and, calm, but it doesn't mean I don't get worked up sometimes, right?
Right, right.
There's those situations and those days and those people, try to have a lot less triggers these days, but there's those people, and circumstances that definitely can, get you worked up, and where you kind of lose control of, in meditation, we call it sitting in the seat of consciousness, right? Becoming hyper aware so that you are empowered
Mm-hmm.
to understand the situations that are happening around you, the actions and reactions, and you're empowered to take the actions you want and not be controlled by external influences, right? Which is very disempowering. And so, here in Utah, and I know, Silicon Slopes and Clint, kind of started this mental health movement because we've lost some really great founders in recent years, that have taken their life due to, the stress and anxiety of what it is to start up a business, right? I totally understand it. I've been there. I mean, I can't say that I've not been impervious to depression and anxiety, and I can't say that every now and again it hasn't occurred to me, it'd be a lot easier to just check out, right?
Yeah.
And I've never really entertained those thoughts, but this is a topic that's important to me, David. I've lost multiple friends, to depression, I've had children who have attempted suicide, or who suffered with suicidal ideation. So all this is very close to home, and I certainly have a lot of empathy, for just the human condition as a whole, and the ways that we often suffer and struggle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this is probably a great time to just briefly mention some resources that are out there. 988 is kind of like 911, but for suicidal thinking. So if anyone out there is listening, if you're struggling with that, you can call, you can text. There are mental health professionals waiting to talk with you about that or to chat with you. If calling's not your thing, you can chat with them over text to provide resources and better understanding. There's also an app called Safe Utah, which is an excellent app as well, and all those sorts of things. There are resources out there. If you're struggling, if you're suffering, reach out. In fact, if you type anything about, I'll do research on suicide just for my professional work, and the first thing you type into Google, the first thing that comes up is something about 988. I mean, all the time. It's
Good.
Right up there at the top, which is great. Good
Yeah.
for Google to do that.
Totally.
To put that right up there, say, are you struggling with this? Call us, text us right now, and you can get help. So as people are, what's the recommendation then? How do you achieve that balance? Because like you said, on the one hand, you've got all this pressure to be successful, to pay your bills. And it's not just to be successful, but it's to avoid failure, right? Because that has real life implications for family or investors or whoever it is, right?
Totally.
Depending on your circumstance. But then if you don't take time for yourself, then I think the likelihood of you imploding at some point is probably higher than otherwise. And so how do people strike that balance?
Yeah, David, as I think about it as a fundamental, problem, for me, I think that there is a wholeness to our being that oftentimes we forget, right? And that wholeness is physical health, mental health, psychological health, spiritual health, right? And regardless of what somebody's ideology is or religious belief system, we're somehow deeply connected, and there's something about us that's that's spiritual. And I think if the more you find time to take care of the whole being, the more you give yourself coping mechanisms and capabilities to deal with all of this stress. And I mean, it can be relentless, right? Especially in early stages of startups. 18, 20 hours a day of nonstop stress in your face, and you scrambling as hard and fast as you can possibly go to just try to keep up and make ends meet, right? And take care of investors and family and all that kind of stuff. It's legit. And so my recommendation is, no matter what stage you're at in your journey, whether that's you started a business 6 months ago or you started one 35 years ago, remember that you have to be a priority, right? And I wasn't good at that, in the early stages of my career. I regularly for 15 years worked 18, 20-hour days, right? And oftentimes, 6 days a week, and sometimes seven when necessary. And it's not sustainable. Like
Yeah.
my body finally told me, and it wasn't, my body finally told me
Right.
you're done doing that, right? And you've got to make yourself a priority. So, my message to everybody is, find a way to have practices, routines, at whatever intervals that, work for you, but regular enough that it
Yeah.
actually serves you, and it doesn't have to be, every single day, but every 2 or 3 days, like get some exercise, right? Have some sort of spiritual practice, meditation or breathing, breath work
Right.
can be so calming and such a great, coping
And it could
mechanism,
take
right?
like 5 minutes,
It
right?
can,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Even a
Exactly. Yeah.
meditation can be 5 minutes
Yeah.
and just
Exactly.
totally change your day, right?
Yeah.
And those are some of, I mean, when I'm faced with some pretty, hairy situations day in and day out, if sometimes I just take 5 minutes to go sit aside, breathe, focus, try to let my mind go blank, and meditate a little bit. And I can completely change the dynamic of the day and, what I'm feeling. And then of course there's all of that psychological and chemical reaction, that your
Right.
body has, that just exacerbates all the cortisol, right? That you get going, and
Yeah.
you get, that's the thing that founders need to know too. You get neurologically addicted to that chemical reaction, right? Of stress
100%.
and
Yes.
anxiety. And the sooner you figure that out, and the sooner you try to, regulate it, because that it's very damaging to the body
Yeah.
over time. And it's a lot of work I've had to do with a lot of, professionals in my life to try to, gain back some of the years that I probably cost myself by grinding nonstop,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not controlling the stress in any way whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, right. I mean, being intentional about it, I think, is the key, right? Like you said, taking time for yourself. It's almost like with a paycheck and saying, I'm gonna save 10% on every paycheck or something like that, right? I'm just gonna
Yeah.
that I'm gonna pay myself first,
Yeah.
and then I will pay the bills and stuff like that. Or if it can't be 10%, if it's $10 or whatever it is, right? It's just that idea of saying, I am important.
Yeah.
And not only you're important, you're critical to the operation because it's you, right? I mean, if you break down, the operation breaks down.
Totally.
And so you have to say, what am I going to do to care for myself? And I think that's maybe the misunderstanding that people have is they say, well, I don't have time for that. I can't do, I can exercise 4 hours a day or drive to Park City for yoga or something like that. You're like, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
I think even the act of saying, I'm going to do something for myself today is curative in and of itself. And then when you do something on top of that, there's an added benefit to it. It's just that thought of I'm worth it. I don't know if that's the right word.
I completely believe, prioritizing yourself sends a strong message that you matter, right?
Yeah.
And I get it. I mean, there's still days where, I start my day at 6:30 or 7 a.m. with meetings or a commitment, and I end at 11 o'clock at night, right? And there are those days where, it's like, okay, when and where am I supposed to get in exercise or meditation or some breath work or, focus on my mental health when it's just, scramble all day and back to back to back to back to back, right? But, that's, the further along I think you get in the journey of a company and certainly of the entrepreneur, wisdom sets in. You get a lot better at time blocking and controlling your schedule and going at a pace that makes sense. Once the financial balance sheet of the business per se is sustainable, you have a lot more flexibility to be able to make sure you're prioritizing yourself, right? But that it has to be a commitment because otherwise business and society and the world around you can and will rule you, right? So it is a matter of intentionality and making that commitment with yourself. I've, over the past 15 years, I've worked with a lot of mentors and coaches and, accountability partners. I mean, I have a life coach and I have a CEO coach, and they both hold me accountable. My life coach daily to things that I commit to do. My CEO coach weekly. I meet with him every week, and I'm accountable for different things on both sides of that, right? And with the life coach, oftentimes it's around prioritizing myself, right?
Yeah.
It's around making sure that I have those practices to take care of my whole being, and that I'm not forgetting those things, right? Because it can be pretty easy to forget about yourself, amidst the chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, like you were saying, if people will make it a priority, even from the beginning, I think that's important, because I think there might be a temptation for some to say, oh, well, that's great. So once my business is profitable and my balance sheet looks like it should be, then I'll start taking care of myself. I had a friend who was older than me, and he had been very, very successful in business his whole life. And he always talked about the things he wanted to do when he retired, all the things he wanted to do. But even well into retirement age, he continued to purchase businesses and stuff, because that was kind of the thing for him, was making more money, and he could help more people by doing that as well. I mean, he was generous with his time, with his means. But it got to the point where then he really just got too old, and he became incapacitated, and he couldn't do any of the things that he wanted to, because he was chasing that particular dream that whole time. And I'm not saying that chasing the dream is a bad thing. I'm just saying there's got to be balance. You have to find balance in there somewhere. And I think anyone can find balance from the beginning, even if it's just, like I said, 5 minutes a day. You say, this is my 5 minutes, and nothing is going to get in the way of this. Even if I have meetings from 6:30 a.m. until 11 o'clock p.m., from 5:45 to 5:50 is going to be my time, right?
Right.
That I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
And then maybe things do change in the future to where you could take a whole day off to do something, or take a month off to go to the South Pacific or something like that and really recharge. But just the idea of valuing yourself enough to do that is critical.
Yeah, as a more tenured entrepreneur, I would encourage, budding entrepreneurs, no matter their age, right? But budding entrepreneurs, to think in terms of farther, not faster. Think in terms of sustainable paces, right? Granted, there are cases in business when speed of execution is very important, right?
Sure.
When getting stuff done, and especially if you're fighting against a market or competition and trying to be first to market, or you have a specific strategic opportunity, but there's an expired timeline on it, right? There are times when speed is important, and you've got to move fast, but businesses overall will function better in the long term when you take them at pace, right?
Yes.
When you're more methodical. You slow down enough, to think critically, to really think strategically, to think about your risk, to think about mitigations, to think about sustainable paces and building, sustainable turnkey operations, and all that kind of stuff, right? Speed is not always, and hustle culture, it's out there,
Right,
and there's a
right.
lot of people that glamorize it, right? But hustling does not necessarily mean that you have to grind nonstop around the clock,
Right.
and not take care of yourself, right? I still recommend, finding that time and being disciplined about, giving yourself that time. And certainly, you mentioned taking time off. Like, there are few things that are more healthy. The thing I do now, I just let my team know, I'm going away for 10 days, 14 days. I will be on digital detox.
Right.
I have a minimalist app on my phone that will lock down my phone, so that I can only receive text and phone calls. Right. Can't look at email. Can't look at all the messaging, all that other stuff. So I just let them know. If there is a true emergency that you absolutely need me for, you have my phone number. Call me. Outside of that, you won't hear from me for that time period. You need to give yourself that disconnect, especially with the hyper connected world today, these things that sit in our pockets. Right. And, I do remember the day, because when I started my business in 1998, I probably had my first flip phone, my first voice stream, cellular plan, but I'm not even sure text messaging was a thing, in 1998. I mean, I think you did that on pagers, but not on phones. Right.
Yeah.
And I do remember the times where, you'd go to the office and you'd work at the office and you'd leave the office and you could leave the office there, right?
Right.
Today, that's almost impossible with these things, right? And it does require some discipline
without being intentional about it. You can do
Yeah.
it, but you have to
Yes.
be more intentional about it than we used to have to in the 90s or the 80s.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. Yeah. So I definitely encourage founders, give yourself that, every 3 or 4 months, go away, have a digital detox.
Yeah.
You gotta, you have to let your nervous system settle down,
Yep.
right? And have, some recovery period, because a lot of us don't even sleep well,
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you were talking about that kind of addiction to the grind almost, and the brain does accommodate and acclimate to what we continue to feed it all the time.
Yeah.
And it will change for good or for bad, regardless of what kind of input it gets.
Yeah.
And the cortisol and the stress, our bodies are not designed to have that 24/7. That it's kind of like NOS for a high performance vehicle or something,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
designed to help you go very fast for a very short amount of time,
Yeah.
and then
It's a
to
fight or flight thing.
exactly,
Yeah,
and to
yeah.
lay off the gas after that.
Yeah.
But now we're revving at 8,000, 9,000 RPMs 24/7,
Yeah.
and like you mentioned earlier, our bodies, that is not sustainable, and you will either see acute or chronic health conditions as a result of that.
Yeah.
Um,
And mental and psychological conditions that come from it too.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and the interesting thing is that we get so addicted to all of that we manufacture the circumstances.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if your day's going too easy, you find ways
Right.
to get yourself all worked up and stressed so that you get that that anxious
Oh,
feeling, and you
man.
get the cortisol and the dopamine
Right,
hits, right?
right.
Your brain needs it, right? So you find ways to catastrophize or to to work things up, right? And so that's where, for me, again, just breath work, and
Yep,
meditation,
yep.
to just center, balance, get yourself
Take the
settled.
temperature back to homeostasis.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Earl, it's been a delight to talk to you. Thank you so much for your insight and your wisdom as well. Any new entrepreneurs out there, listen to this over and over again. Listen to what Earl had to say, because it's important. These are things that you're going to need going forward. I mean, success is accessible to everybody, but the path to get there, we need to be intentional about it, and not only be successful for the business, but successful for ourselves as well over time. So
100%. I mean, you're building that business because you're trying to build a lifestyle, right?
Exactly,
You're
yeah.
trying to build some freedom. Make sure that you're mindful about how you do that along the way, so that you actually end up giving yourself some freedom. And
you can
you're
enjoy
not,
it.
and you can
Yeah,
enjoy it. You're
yeah.
not shackled to, I hesitate to say disease, but to a compromised body, and
Absolutely.
mind and psyche, right?
Yeah.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Awesome.
David, thank you.
Of course. Thank you very, very much. Thanks, everyone, for listening today. We invite you to tune in to future episodes where you can learn to increase your mental health momentum.